Chapter 6. Cam. Cam hurried through the large modern home, descending the stairs and rushing across a marble or maybe ceramic floor that probably cost the owner a few $100s per square foot to have installed. Opening the door, he jogged out to get his bike and wheeled it inside. With their future so firmly planted in the unknown, he wanted to safeguard their prized possessions against anything negative, such as theft or damage from the elements. "Bring all the bikes inside, and I'll put them in the garage." He didn't want the kids to see the shattered doorframe, knowing it would elicit a plethora of morality questions about why their father caused damage to a complete stranger's home. Since they'd become old enough to fully understand the definition of hypocrisy, Cam found himself more or less walking the straight and narrow. That meant he'd been banned from cursing, even the low-level stuff. His daughter took point on the oversight of his language and would report his trespasses to Jen, after which he'd get an earful. Once everyone was inside, staring at the over-the-top artwork and crazy ceiling design in the center of the large main living area, Cam took the 4 bikes to the garage and deposited them there. Before he left, he stood looking at his handiwork, then searched the garage for tools to secure the damaged door. He found a hammer, nails, a piece of scrap 2x4, and some screws. He inserted the screws through the door in the area most damaged by his foot and tightened them down. That pulled the shattered door back together, somewhat, but the lock wasn't aligned. He nailed the piece of lumber across the door jamb, then nailed the piece to the door, fusing the two in place. At least if someone tried coming through the door, they'd make as much noise as he'd done a few minutes ago. Back inside the house, he locked the door leading into the kitchen and found the kids sitting at the counter on stools while their mother rummaged through what had to be the largest refrigerator any of them had ever seen. Jen took her eyes off what she was doing as her husband entered the kitchen. "Hey, babe, I think some of these perishables are still okay." An idea suddenly came to him, and he scanned the back deck area where he spotted exactly what he was looking for: a barbecue. He couldn't tell if it was a propane setup or plumbed to natural gas, so he went to check. The barbecue unit turned out to be a propane job. He scratched his head, thinking after all the money the owners must have spent on the house, they went cheap on the barbecue. Either way, it suited his needs just fine. Back inside, he made a beeline for Jen. "We have a barbecue out back," he announced triumphantly. Jen gave him a tolerant smile. "Babe, we also have a gas range, and it works. We've just got to find a lighter." She reached into a drawer and withdrew a hand towel. In her other hand, she held bits of ice. Not much, but it was still ice. She transferred the ice into the towel and motioned Layla over. "Come here, sweetheart." Cam watched, puzzled and unsure what the problem was, not to mention where she'd found ice. Layla came over and laid her hands out, palms up, and then he saw the blisters. "Geez, Laylee, what happened?" Jen looked at her husband with a flat expression. "Her hands have been like this since after the bridge. She didn't want to say anything because she was afraid you'd be mad." Cam moved to his daughter's side and wrapped his arms around her slender shoulders as Jen applied the towel to her wounds. "Honey, you gotta speak up when you're hurt, especially now. Baby, if something happens and you slow us down for a while, that's way better than if you keep quiet until you can't go any further and we're all stuck waiting for you to heal." Layla's eyes glistened with tears as she tried to smile back at her father. "It seemed like we couldn't stop, and I didn't want to be the one who made us sleep on the side of the road, Dad." Cam smiled grimly as he squeezed Layla hard for a moment before turning on Taylor. "You all good, boy?" "I'm okay, Dad." "Come here," Cam prompted, not wanting to take even the tiniest of chance. Taylor turned out to be fine. His hands weren't even red, but the incident caused both Cam and Jen to rethink their baton death march approach to getting to Sonoma with 2 fairly young children in tow. The situation reminded him of Marine Corps boot camp, and that although the drill instructor's daily routine suggested they didn't care whether a recruit lived or died, their true intent was quite the opposite. Recruits were constantly monitored and forced to hydrate, along with a brief but effective medical examination performed every evening before lights out. He needed to get back to basics, check on his wife, his kids, and make sure everyone was making it without killing themselves. Jen cooked a meal that consisted of chicken, vegetables, and a salad, as if nothing was wrong in the world. The sun disappeared over the hills to the west, driving Cam into search mode, looking for candles or another lighting source. In the master bathroom upstairs, he hit pay dirt, locating 12 candles, all arranged around a bathtub the size of a hot tub. He took 8 of the candles downstairs, leaving the rest upstairs for use when they decided it was bedtime. Eating a home-cooked hot meal whilst gazing out into a black abyss, made Cam feel like whatever happened had elevated him in the societal food chain. As he wolfed down Jen's delicious cooking, he marveled at how entirely black the landscape was in the absence of man-made light. So dark was the view from their borrowed multi-million-dollar domicile, he couldn't tell where the bay began and the land left off. He'd wrapped Layla's hands with gauze after applying an antibiotic cream from one of the bathrooms. The kids' faces glowed a warm orange in the flickering light of a candle meant more for the scent and ambiance than what the Griffins were using it for. The more he thought of the candle, the more Cam realized it was serving its intended purpose very well, and that his family appeared in great spirits under its flickering incandescence. An hour later, he found himself standing alone in the master bedroom. He could hear the muffled sounds of Jen tucking the kids into the single bed in the room next door. She'd wanted them close in case there were bad dreams, or worse. He gazed tiredly out into the blackness of the night over the bay. The bare windows of the master bedroom would have offered a staggering view of the bay at night if only there'd been lights to reference the different points along the shoreline. As it was, the windows stared back at him like large, empty, black eye sockets. Jen swept into the bedroom, her bare feet patting softly on the wood floors, a small candle clutched in her hand. Its flickering light joined that of the candle already on the dresser next to the bathroom door. "Kids are down." He smiled at his wife, his face appearing piebald from the different shades of yellows and browns as the candles gave the impression that lambent tongues of flames were caressing his features. "Want to help me shave?" Jen set her candle next to his and melted into him, her arms curling around his neck as she stared up into his eyes. "I would like that a lot, Mr. Griffin." Inside the bathroom, they moved both paltry sources of light to the bone-white sink top, while Jen waited as Cam searched the drawers and cupboards for the owner's shaving equipment. Whoever lived in the home didn't use disposable razors with triple blades and gelled assist strips, opting instead for an old-school shaving kit, complete with a Badger shave brush. "Up you go," she ordered, tapping the countertop next to the sink. He turned and sat on the counter as she wet her hand under the weak stream of water from the faucet. Dabbing the Badger brush into a tin of soap, she swirled the brush in the palm of her hand, creating soapy suds. They didn't speak as she prepared the brush, swirling it in her hand, adding water, and then repeating the process until she held a usable amount of soap suds in her small, cupped hand. With the hand that held the brush, she lifted his chin and used the back of her index finger to gently position his head to expose the front of his neck. "You know, I miss this," she said as she applied the first stroke of shaving suds to the side of his throat. He breathed out through his nostrils, trying his best to keep his head tilted for her. "We still have to make time for us, Jen, even after all this." She brushed his neck, lathering the stubble, and cocked her head in the dim light to ensure she covered every inch of exposed skin. I agree, she breathed softly. He waited until she lathered his cheeks, chin, and upper lip to push her hands down and lean into her. Their lips touched softly. They held the pose for a full 5 seconds as they both enjoyed the peace and tranquility of each other's touch. When they pulled away, he smiled, while her gaze wandered past him to search the mirror's reflection, the sudsy froth on the image gazing back at her, a reminder of their lingering kiss. More of that, definitely. She smiled warmly again, her features enhanced by the orange lighting. Lots more of that. Now chin up, Marine. Cam tilted his head, and she went to work on his beard with the razor, scraping carefully against the grain of his hair. Although the water she used wasn't cold, the warmth from her delicate hands somehow neutralized it, and he was able to enjoy being cared for instead of having to be the one doing all the work and absorbing all the worry that went along with being in charge. When she'd finished scraping his face of unwanted hair, she used a towel to wipe away the excess suds. Dropping the towel on the countertop, Jen leaned in close, her nose lightly brushing the sensitive skin of his neck as she inhaled the musky, masculine scent of the shaving soap. You smell like a man. He thought briefly of making a joke, but decided to steer clear, not wanting to take away from the moment he was having with his wife. Not half as good as you look, babe. Their gazes locked for several seconds before she spoke. I can't think of anyone else in the world I'd rather go through all this with. I know, Jen. I know. No, Cam, I really mean it. You're my world. Our world. Even if this wasn't happening, I can't imagine doing life without you. He pushed back a strand of hair that had fallen across one of her eyes. Then don't, 'cause I'm not going anywhere. I've always loved you, but now I'm trusting you like I've never thought possible. I love you more for that, Jen. Just know I believe in you. I have faith things will turn out with you as my husband. I love you for that, but never stop thinking for yourself, babe. They embraced, their passion driven not only by their love for each other, but by the dire situation they were faced with. With their future so full of uncertainty, they both felt as though they were clinging to one another, possibly for the last time. When their embrace loosened and finally fell away, he led her from the bathroom into the bedroom. After blowing out both candles, they felt their way to the king-size bed and lay back against the plush pillows, tired, but not too tired. Army Captain Ron Sims stared out the windscreen of his UH-60 Blackhawk, scanning the mostly blue skies stretched out to his front. He flew at 500 feet AGL, hugging the natural terrain the best he could as he transitioned west from the Fallon Naval Warfare Base on a mission that had him more than a little unnerved. In the back of his aircraft were 8 shaved apes, or 8 Special Forces types, broad in the shoulders and bearded, the silent professional kind of men America used to fight its secret wars. Only this time, those men were being inserted into different communities along 2 major highways that traverse the state of California, Highway 5 and Highway 101. Ron's eyes flitted to his instrument panel, scanning all the gauges that reported his aircraft's health before inspecting his fuel situation. The last drop-off was very near his aircraft's range limitations, and Ron was relying on a mid-air refueling rendezvous in order to make it back home. The problem was, in the past 50 hours, several aircraft out on missions over California or the Pacific Ocean had been shot down, and all those were fixed-wing fast movers, which Ron was not. To atone for his lack of airspeed, Ron kept close to the ground in an effort to remain unseen by the prying eyes of the Chinese or North Korean radar. He'd been briefed on what they were dealing with, but the briefing only created more questions, in his opinion. The intel analyst, who'd nervously pushed at his glasses for 15 minutes, had been unable to answer a single question to any of the pilots' liking and only let the pilots know the U.S. government was floundering. Mr. Intel hadn't even been able to say for sure what their enemy's intent was, other than that they detonated at least 3 electromagnetic pulse weapons over the United States and then began systematically eliminating strategic infrastructural targets using cruise missiles launched from somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. When asked if the missiles were coming from a ship or submarine, the man had no answer. Simmons had never seen or heard anything like that in all his military career, and it frightened him. America was supposed to always maintain the upper hand, so how was it that he was flying into California with a pucker factor higher than any he'd experienced while fighting in the Middle East? Ron's co-pilot was a 24-year-old kid just out of flight school and not checked out on any of the flying he was doing right now. The youngster, Timothy Weller, was a nice enough guy, just green and wet behind the ears, not the perfect partner for a mission like this one. Ron's workload lessened as he reached the bottom of the Sierras and was able to fly in a straight and mostly flat line, rarely in need of ripping the collective into his armpit to clear an obstacle in his flight path. He was dropping 4 two-man teams off, 2 teams per highway, and they were fast approaching his first LZ. Ron wasn't briefed on his cargo's mission, but imagined if they were working around a main transit through one of the largest states in the Union, America was trying her best to stop an invading force from using those roads to their advantage. Checking his GPS coordinates again, Ron keyed his in-aircraft mic and let the men in the back know they were 5 minutes from LZ Crazy Horse. One of the men in the back acknowledged him, but that was it. Ron didn't bother with all the 1 minute out stuff, knowing these guys were ready to hit the LZ the moment they'd boarded. When he was close enough to the LZ, Ron began looking for an open area large enough to accommodate his aircraft. It was broad daylight, and he wouldn't be doing any orbiting to make sure there were no power lines or other death-dealing obstacles in his path. No, he would bomb straight in. The men would drop out the side doors, and he'd be airborne again, all in less than 5 seconds. "Open space! Along the hiking trail there! You see it, Gav?" Ron called out over the radio to his crew chief, Gavin Little, who ran the back of the aircraft while Ron drove. "Got it!" Ron began to arrest the aircraft's forward speed, lifting the nose and compensating by lowering the collective so the helicopter didn't climb. It was a balancing act flying the huge, lumbering insects, but he was pretty comfortable in most situations. He quickly realized his adrenaline was causing him to come in much faster than he would have preferred. No problem. He ripped the aircraft's nose skyward, using the main rotor like a brake as he literally dumped the collective nearly into its idle position. "Want to go around?" Gavin asked from the back. "Nope," was all Ron said as the big helicopter nosed over, shuddering under the strain Ron was putting on the airframe. His eyes shot down towards his feet, visually checking his altitude, and then he was scanning outside the cockpit. No bad guys, nothing he might fly into on his way out of the LZ. All was good in the world. "Clear!" Gav announced after the 2 men leapt from the helicopter, even before it contacted the earth. Ron gathered in the collective, felt the aircraft try to slide to one side due to the translating tendency as he put in a touch of cyclic in the opposite direction to halt the side movement, then pushed forward, helping the helicopter gain forward airspeed. As they gained momentum, he worked both the collective and the cyclic in unison to maintain a steady and controlled climb out of the LZ. At 500 feet AGL, he leveled off and headed for his next drop-off point. After the next 2 teams were in place, Ron aimed his aircraft for a spot just south of Petaluma, where the final team would be deposited. He dropped the last 2 Green Berets off north of Santa Rosa and had only to follow Highway 101 south to coordinate his refueling before heading back to Fallon for some badly needed rest. Captain Mike Blakey was teamed with another Green Beret, Sergeant First Class Tim Conley, but Mike was in charge of the 2-man detail. It didn't really matter who was in charge in these small, highly specialized units, since they all were grown-ups and tended to make the need for supervision unneeded. Mike and Tim were the last 2 to be dropped, and to say they both found what was happening highly unusual would have been the understatement of the century. As the helicopter left the LZ, Mike and Tim moved a short distance from their drop-off point and were about to hunker down for a few to make sure they weren't in the company of any unfriendly types. Mike wasn't looking at the departing helicopter when he heard a loud crack, but as he turned, he could see the bird already smoking as it began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster as it lost what little altitude the poor pilot had gained on his short-lived exit of the LZ. "What the hell was that?" Mike barked, looking around as he wondered if they actually might not be alone. I think they just caught a surface to air," Tim gasps, his eyes locked on the doomed bird as it struck the ground hard and burst into flames. "Get on the horn. We need to get a search and rescue in here," Mike ordered. Tim carried the team radio while Mike carried their medical gear and extra ammo for both players. Mike waited impatiently as Tim scrambled to set up comms with their base through a SAT uplink. 5 minutes later, both men sat there, stunned after being told to stand down and continue their mission. Mike had argued they were close enough to move to the crash site and either report or render aid, but was ordered to stand down. Their mission objective was broad but simple: infiltrate the city of Petaluma and form a militia. How they did that depended on the reception they received from local government leaders. Either way, they were then to train and coordinate the militia members in tactics consistent with supply line disruption. The intelligence they were read in on indicated a foreign actor would be landing somewhere between Canada and Mexico. Highway 5 and Highway 101 were the two main roads that ran the entire length of America's west coast. It was believed one or both of those highways would be used by the enemy to control the western seaboard. With many of America's troops overseas and no way of recalling reserves in the States, the military was scrambling to ensure an effective supply line could not be established by the enemy. Camp Pendleton was full of savage warfighters, and Mike doubted an invading force would choose to push through the 1st Marine Division in an attempt to control the West Coast. His tactical mind told him that if a hostile force wished to occupy the western portion of America, they'd be coming from the north. The only real barriers between Vancouver and California were the Rangers at JBLM, or Joint Base Lewis McChord. Mike wasn't kidding himself about their enemies being able to either bypass the Rangers or overrun them. With only a battalion of Rangers stationed at the base, along with the men and women from the Air Force, it wouldn't take much to seize control. Mike didn't even know how many Rangers would be at the base with all the deployment requirements placed on specialized units like the Rangers, Marine Raiders, SEALs, and other Tier 1 units used to beat back America's threats. He was pretty damn sure whoever was perpetrating this attack on the U.S. would roll right through JBLM and be on their way south with little to no resistance. "Did you see where that surface-to-air came from?" he asked, remembering they might have a bad actor in their AO. "I didn't see it until about a split second before it impacted the bird. Best I can guess is it came from the north end of the bay in the mountains there somewhere." Mike stared out across the countryside, thinking more than searching for the unseen threat. It made sense whoever was doing this would have hard assets in the country disrupting as much of America's efforts to fight back as they possibly could. Running his hands through his hair, Mike gave a disapproving shake of his head. "I'd love to go hunting, but we have orders. Let's get moving." The Griffins' first night sleeping in the plush accommodations of a millionaire's home made life seem more fairy tale than apocalyptic. No one bothered them during the night, and with no noise from roads, planes, or even the home's climate control system, they all slept like babies. Cam woke first and heated a pan of water on the gas stove. Once the liquid was boiling, he filled the automatic coffee maker with a filter and a couple of scoops of finely ground gourmet coffee beans. He removed the pan from the stove and carefully poured the water over the grounds, watching as the hot fluid made its way through the coffee filter and into a mug he found in a cabinet. With his cup of freshly brewed coffee in hand, he walked out to the back patio and felt the warmth of the mid-morning sun on his face. He didn't know the time, but was sure it was after 9:30. If not 10. He sank into an Archipelago Orion lounge chair, made by Seasonal Living, which cost roughly $2,500 per chair. Of course, he knew nothing of that, but the chair sure was comfortable as he settled in to enjoy the cup of hot coffee before the rest of his family woke and he was forced back into husbanding and fathering duties. He'd steal a slice of time and enjoy it to the fullest, just watching He shot to his feet as he registered the presence of a military helicopter racing just above the ground to the northeast. After his time in the Marine Corps, he could tell the difference between civilian and military helicopters simply by the sound they made. The military aircraft made a larger sound, not louder, just bigger and throatier than a civilian news chopper or law enforcement bird emitted. He wished he had a set of binoculars as he strained to track the fast-moving craft, watching it draw closer, heading in from the north and traversing the train in a southerly direction. The helicopter's path wouldn't bring it to his location, but it was drawing closer with each passing second. Then, suddenly the nose of the aircraft shot skyward while the engine screamed at a higher pitch, and the helicopter seemed to stand on its tail, slowing and then dropping toward the ground. The thing was landing, and not all that far off, he thought. As the helicopter descended, he lost sight of it for a full 15 seconds until it rose from the landscape and made a large arc, turning back to leave in a southeasterly direction. He was about to drop back into the comfort of the lounge chair when his peripheral caught a flash from just south of the aircraft's path. His eyes tracked to the right and caught sight of a thin streak of smoke tracing a white line across the blue landscape in the direction of the helicopter. Tracking the thin line, he became acutely aware he was about to witness something very terrible. In that moment, he tore his eyes away from the horror unfolding to the east to make sure his children weren't standing behind him watching the tragedy unfold. No one stood behind him, and he pivoted back in time to see a flash of flames as the white line of smoke came in contact with the low-flying helicopter. The sound of the impact reached his ears a second later as the Black Hawk began to rotate in its death descent. A distant crunch sounded just after the aircraft disappeared into the trees out of his sight. Oh my God, that was a U.S. military aircraft, shot down right here in the Bay Area, he thought. Abstractly, he wondered if he'd imagined the entire tragedy. The gravity of what he had just witnessed while holding a steaming cup of what turned out to be very good coffee struck him like a speeding truck. He fell more than sat back into the lounge chair, stunned, the hot coffee splashing over his hand and wrist. Although he felt the burn, he remained fixated on the last spot he'd seen the stricken aircraft. Not 15 seconds after the crunch of impact, he saw the black, acrid smoke rising above the trees, indicating what he'd seen hadn't been his imagination. The sound of his wife's voice jolted him out of his captivated focus on the distant tendrils of smoke curling towards the heavens. "Hey, handsome, where'd you find the coffee?" When he turned in her direction, Jen froze before her own gaze was drawn to the black smoke from the wrecked helicopter. "What's that from?" she asked, with trepidation in her voice. He shot a look past his wife, but saw no children. "Kid still down?" She nodded, concern spreading across her pretty features. "Someone just shot down a Black Hawk helicopter. It came in from the north and landed way over there." He jabbed a bladed hand in the direction he'd seen the helicopter land. Then, as it was leaving, a missile or something came from the south, hit it, and down they went. Jen's hands went to her mouth, all thoughts of coffee temporarily forgotten as her husband described the unthinkable. As her hands slowly dropped away from her face, Jen's eyes met his. "Who would have done this? And how?" "I'm at a loss, babe. I guess if another country was going to invade the U.S., they'd have people here ahead of time to mess things up or slow down our military's ability to respond to whatever they're doing. I just don't know," he said, fumbling for words. After a few seconds, Jen stepped over and sat in the lounge chair next to him as they both watched the Black Hawk burning far off in the distance. Wordlessly, he handed her his cup of coffee, offering a taste of a fading civilization. For the next 20 minutes, they sat and watched the fire burn itself out, drank their shared cup of hot joe, and pondered a future that seemed to grow more ambiguous with every passing day. When they finished the coffee, he turned to her. I think we should stay here for a few days, let Layla heal, and sort of let the world sort itself out before we get back on the road. This thing, he gestured at the still smoking wreckage of the Blackhawk, has me spooked. Bad.